So Stuart, we're going to talk now about mapping culture and values. And so just going back to our earlier discussions about Pasteur and Galileo, I'd like to just give us a frame here. So Galileo didn't map all the heavens. What he showed us was how the solar system worked. The starting point, which established the principles for all the future exploration later. And Pasteur didn't look at all disease. He was fussing about rabies.
Right.
But by discovering how rabies work, he was able to come up with a cure right away. And that started really, modern medicine. What would be our starting point?
Well, I mean, if I was to build on what you're talking about there, I think for each of them, there must have been a point where they saw something that maybe they didn't even expect to see, that all of a sudden threw them back and changed their whole perspective of what reality was.
Absolutely.
So the first time we looked through the telescope,
the moons of Venus.
Holy, I didn't expect to see that out of there, or the microscope, and that's actually what I'm seeing within that.
Yes.
I think the equivalent in our conversation is really being able to see that the intangibles are really driving the tangibles. So if we had that as a starting point, that's a pretty big jump.
Oh yeah.
For most people to think, the intangibles aren't these things on the side that I got to maybe pay attention to.
They're not the soft issues, right? They're the drivers.
No, exactly. Most of the time, intangibles are thought to be soft. To your point, they're thought to be nice to have. They're thought to be, well, I'll look at those after I get the real work done.
Right.
If we flip that around, where we said, actually, it's the intangibles that are driving every tangible that we have, and if we can understand and map those, just seeing that as a starting point allows us to say, okay, well, what are the driving forces in intangibles? How are we going to get this map? What are the things that, if we boil down the intangibles, what are the outcomes that we need?
Yeah, that's good, because Pasteur discovered that he could see things that we couldn't see that were driving certain kinds of diseases, and it wasn't smells or whatever.
Yeah.
It was something that you couldn't be seen, but then he could make predictive, with some confidence, predictive thoughts about how
so we're
the
in the
future
same
will work.
state right now.
Yes.
How if we can buy this intangible component, if you can actually see that. Now we don't have a microscope, we don't have a telescope, but what we can potentially do is map out outcomes, or necessary outcomes, based on all of the science that we've looked at in the past, from a societal standpoint, from an organizational standpoint. What do you need? What are the core relationships that you need to be successful? Now, the other part of this, if you sort of build off the intangible thing, is that really what we're talking about from a human standpoint is the most important intangible is our culture.
Yes.
And our culture is really made up of a series of relationships between individuals.
Yes.
And the individuals' relationships are really built on bridges of individual values. What is important to one another. And really what we have to understand if we're going to start mapping an intangible around culture, for example, which is, to me, we can show is probably one of the most powerful intangibles, if not the most powerful intangible, then we have to start talking about relationships.
Yes.
Not in a soft sense, but relationships in terms of what type of relationships does a society or a culture need to grow in a healthy way.
Because we talked about that before.
So it's got to be a true growth as opposed to a fake growth.
Or a cancer growth.
Exactly, one of those things. Which still happens, and we can actually. And how can we know whether we're growing like a cancer growth or whether we're growing like a true growth?
Yes.
What is the analysis around that? So if you pull way back, this is going to be one of those pull back components and say, what are the driving relationships? Really, there's only three core relationships. Now you're going to build on each one of these because there's infinite amount of potential relationships in the universe.
Right.
But at the highest level,
it's interesting you say three, because many people listening to you now will go, surely there must be many rules, but we in the science of emergence, they're looking at very complex things like birds flocking or fish schooling. So you see all these birds swirling around, you think, gosh, there must be so many rules. But there are only three, actually.
Yeah.
So nature uses very simple, few elegant rules.
Well, I mean, yeah. And
so you're talking about there are three, and that makes sense. The science, the stuff we already know,
right,
tells you that aren't going to be much more than 5.
Right. Well, and I mean, if you want to look at it from a tangible standpoint, where 3 is an interesting number. It does. When you have 3, you can develop a fractal, a true fractal.
Yes.
2, it's a binary.
Yes.
But 3, you can develop.
3 is complex.
You can go from 3 to infinite, a number of combinations of those 3. Look at color.
Look at DNA. There are only 4.
Right.
So the whole of life is a variant of 4.
If you have to have a minimum of 3, I think, because that allows you to fractal the various levels. So
yes.
You take something that all of us can look around the room right now at color.
Right.
Color, there's infinite amount of colors, but there's only 3 primary colors.
Yes.
And so when we talk about relationships, I'm thinking about it in the same way.
Right.
There's an infinite amount of relationships, but there's only 3 primary relationships.
I like the one between color. Yeah, because there's blue, but there is purple and all that. But it's all sort of
But basically there's the 3 core colors. So if we could identify what those are, then we can understand. In the relationship between those, then we can start mapping out the color spectrum, for lack of a better thing. Color spectrum, some colors we can't even see. But within the light spectrum, we can't see. So there might be elements of that too, but we're going to start with, if we're going to talk about those 3 elements, the first is, if we boil everything down, is we need to nurture each other.
Yes.
In any society, there has to be a healthy abundance of nurturing relationships. And how I define nurturing, it's a non-transactional relationship. We're not in this for a deal. We're in this because I, as a nurturer, want to help you realize your potential as a human.
Yes.
And what does that mean? It means I'm not trying to mold you. I'm trying to help you understand your natural place in the world. And the first step of that is really understanding your own personal values. Yes. Once you get your own personal values.
Because it's hard to nurture somebody else if you are not very well nurtured yourself, because it tends to be more about me than you.
Or conditioning. This is, I know more than you, so I'm going to condition you so you'll survive in the world, but you have to be this way. As opposed to, okay, let's uncover your values. Let's play at a very early age. Let's play to understand what you really turns, what really makes you fire up. What really makes you, well, the way I always put it is, what are you doing when you lose sense of time? When you lose sense of time, you're actually doing something that is reflective of your values in a way that is, real growth.
So that's flow.
It's flow, yeah. I mean, when you are in flow, you should look at what you're doing, because that's going to be a really big hint
as to who you really are.
Who you really are. When you're forcing everything all the time, you got to say, geez, this is who you think you should be. If everybody was working in flow, this universe would be very emergent.
So flow.